All systems go. Cleared for takeoff. What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, a.k.a. ToeTagginTambo, back for another edition of the review show here on the SHIPIT Nation YouTube station. If you're just joining us for the first time, hammer that like button on the way in. Subscribe to the channel. Almost to 4,000 subscribers. It's the tour for 4. When we do get there, we'll be giving away a 6-month bundle to SHIPITNation.com. Got my guy Nades here with me as always, but before I bring him in, want to remind everyone very quickly, this show is brought to you and presented by LineStar. We're going to be using LineStar app to show you guys the perfect lineup. Ton of great content that you can get over there. A complimentary piece to SHIPIT Nation. Check it out if you guys haven't done so already. We'll be sharing the perfect lineup using their tool, breaking it all down from what was week 7. And as we always say, if you didn't win yet, so far, you got a chance to get it back. Monday Night Football later today, 2 p.m. Eastern. Hoop, Title, and myself will be live on the Mayo Media Network, breaking down everything for tonight's game between the 49ers and the... Who's the team tonight? Oh, Minnesota, the Vikings. We got Kirk Cousins in prime time. Nades, bring you in, man. How was your week?
Week was not the best, but not the best yet. Had a chance going into the afternoon. Afternoon games obviously didn't go as planned. Morning didn't go as planned. I mean, you got Minshew mania out here a week early. We were all on Minshew a week early and that whole stack there. And it decided not to go off there in a great matchup and comes into the best matchup or the hardest matchup in football and absolutely nuke. So that's just the game we play. But looking through it, we can definitely learn some things. And I think we were right on a lot. At least myself is right on a lot. Didn't put it all together. Had some different stuff go different ways. But overall, not the best week yet. But we still got tonight, Monday Night Football.
Yeah, definitely a so far week for me. I'll be looking to get it back tonight. Yesterday had some spots good, some not so good. Jacobs busted. The most tilting part was obviously the flop. Like I wasn't getting to it. I'm not going back to Gardner Minshew against Cleveland like that. But last week, if you guys saw this show specifically reviewing my lineups, I was all over Minshew and Foreman, and those guys just go back and absolutely crush on this slate. Last week, we also had Dalton. So if you guys didn't check this show out, Dalton won the Millie Maker last week. He went back. You can go on our X, formerly known as Twitter, at SHIPIT Nation. Follow us there. Going to be some big stuff coming with NBA launching tomorrow. Want to check it out later on anyway. But just to note this, he went back and had another big week. You can see it on there. Our guy, Broad Street Drinker, won $50K in the Showdown Streets last night. A ton of NHL winnings. Our guy, Rob Mazika, on fire again. So go check all that out. But I will say, when we get to the $20 Millie Maker winner for this week, Nades, feels like they might have watched the show last week or something and took some inspiration from it because very close to the optimal and a blowout. Again, a huge blowout. It's like 18 points. They one-upped our guy Dalton and got the job done there. So we'll get to that in a little bit here. Shout out to everybody that's joining us. Our guy Tweezy, as always. Newlands is first in. Capehead number 2 on the likes. Good math, guys. A complex kid. Ross, what's up? Says another week, another profitable NFL DFS week at the Nation. Free money Sundays. Our guy Title always speaks to that. He loves to see that. So let's keep it rolling here. Let's go through and break down what we've got. I'm going to bring up the perfect lineup. First off, we'll swap it over. Hopefully that is zoomed in enough, but it looks good. You guys can see it here. Minshew, I'll talk through it, Nades, first, but I think the lineup's kind of interesting, actually. Like Minshew, fine, but then Gibbs, Foreman, Downs stacked with Minshew, Nakua over Cup. By the way, you guys don't want to hear this again, but National Tight Ends Week, as we kept hearing all day on Red Zone, etc. Not only in the optimal with Waller and Kelsey, but a couple of the main $20 winner had, and we'll get to it, had Mark Andrews and Kelsey. So what do you know? National Tight Ends Day gets the job done. 2 tight ends, 1 in the flex. Going here, though, Nakua instead of a Cooper Kupp play. Palmer as the cross secondary stack with Travis Kelsey, Waller, and then the Bears D paired with Foreman. So this one leaves $900 on the table, Nades. Take note, 247.6 was the score. Thoughts on this one, Nades? You talk us through it as people go over to our X, Twitter, whatever, and check it out.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's definitely, I think this lineup the perfect lineup actually makes more sense than a lot of the perfect lineups that we see that are just kind of crazy. And I actually think this makes a little bit more sense as a lineup than the winner that won the $20 winner, the $20 millionaire. Obviously, he blew the field away there, but the value stack there with Minshew and Downs, right? Downs has been targeted a ton by Minshew. Obviously, I'm never getting to there against Cleveland. I get the whole flop leg thing, but Cleveland been the best defense all year long. And now Minshew, after coming off an absolute cakewalk matchup and just getting dusted, comes in and just shows up and goes crazy. But does have a stack there. The Nakua, how'd you get to Nakua, or how would you have got to Nakua in a build like this, right? Number one, you don't have the salary for Cooper Kupp because you're playing Travis Kelce, right? You make the plan that, hey, that's one of the highest totals on the slate is that Chargers game there. You want Travis Kelce. That's the pivotal piece. You don't want to mess around. You can't get up to Mahomes and pay for both of them because you want to play guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, right, with no money out there. So it's Jahmyr Gibbs. Maybe they unleash him there. That game was supposed to be more competitive than what it turned out to be. So got to go value quarterback, grab his value stack that he's locked in on. Can't get up all the way to Cooper Kupp, but you still want a piece of that offense there. Why not Nakua, right? After a flop, everyone was on both of them last week, right? Running Stafford, double stacks with Kupp and Nakua. And obviously Kupp got the job done. Nakua only had like 7 points last week. He was $1,900 cheaper than Cooper Kupp was this year. Cooper Kupp all the way up to $9,500. So very hefty price tag. Throw Nakua in there. He's still involved in the offense. The double tight end on National Tight End Day, we'll actually see that come up in the $20 winner as well. The double tight end there. That's always unique. I've never really a guy that's going to run two tight ends unless it makes sense. Which in a build like this, it actually does make sense because you can look at Travis Kelce is not a normal tight end, right? He's basically the whole offense there in Kansas City. Obviously, Rashid Rice is been emerging now as kind of their number one wide receiver, but it's still Travis Kelce there. So the Travis Kelce, Darren Waller thing, it's more like a cheaper alpha wide receiver, right? I mean, you can argue he's the same kind of guy for Cooper Kupp for the Rams as he is for Kansas City, and he's $1,500 cheaper than Cooper Kupp was. So I get the whole build. The Dante Foreman Bears defense correlation, I like that there. Foreman obviously getting the hat trick there in terms of touchdowns. 1-2 yard touchdowns was a little bit annoying after I had about 65% Foreman last week. And he just comes back this week and goes crazy. But overall, lineup makes sense. And you could definitely have gotten here, which typically we don't see too many times when we review perfect lineups, right? Especially with a lineup that leaves $900 on the table. Typically, it's just a bunch of random pieces. This one's actually kind of fairly correlated, and you could actually get here logically building the lineup.
Yeah, and I think that's the key for me. Like I might have had it set up a little bit differently if I got to this, but you still would have been in good shape. Like maybe it's Geno and JSN instead of Downs and Minshew, and you don't get to this score and this. And for those that don't understand it or are maybe watching for the first time, obviously this isn't a lineup somebody built. This is what the perfect lineup is on this slate. And it's just like Nades is saying, a couple things that came to fruition that made it actually more realistic. And even if you swap out the first part is like, no one played these guys. For the most part, I should say, the reason you won't see them in the winners is because nobody really got to this and then all the other right pieces with it. This is the perfect lineup, hence the name. But a couple things like the Gibbs play obviously makes sense. You're missing guys there. Montgomery out, so be it. Foreman, Bears D. Not just that Foreman was a potential good play because no Roshan and already missing other pieces there, but just in general, remember on this slate, and the guy that got me, Josh Jacobs, extremely high owned. You double down on that leverage. You play the opposite running back and the defense against. That makes sense. Nakua, a lot of people playing Cooper Kupp. Nakua, I had it in the tidbits this week, which when you looked earlier, and I showed you guys there with our guy Dalton, he said he got the Drake London nugget from the tidbits on the show. He credited the tidbits there. That's just me going around curating stuff from around. So it's just what I think is interesting. But that was an interesting one this week that made it to the tidbits was Nakua was still getting a ton of first look reads and getting action even with Kupp being back. So if you didn't have the money to get there, still made sense. Palmer, Kelce, you'll see that in one of my main core lineup on the site. I had that combination in it. I only listed Kelce, but you'll see the actual lineup later. I love that secondary in the afternoon. And then we've seen this work a couple times, Nades. I can think back to last season. We've been doing these shows for a little while, but last season there was weeks where Greg Dortch kept being popular. This week, Wanderlei Robinson. Guess what happened every time Greg Dortch got popular? Trey McBride at the tight end spot had a big week. This week, Darren Waller slides in for the Wanderlei Robinson stuff. And this was actually a good matchup on paper. I think if you went to the DBP rankings, we talked, it was either that or looking at it from a different perspective, something we talked about. I'll check it after. But Waller sliding in there actually does make sense. And so you see that, like I said, maybe it wasn't Minshew Downs and you don't get 60 plus points, but maybe it's Geno and JSN, and you still end up with a lineup like this or close to it and can definitely see it. The flop leg, the chat talks about too. I mean, at home, Soldier Field against Hoyer, who can sling it around at times. So you could have a way to get after him, and then double leveraging, essentially going against Jacobs and then getting the D against him as well. Definitely don't hate that. Anything else on the perfect lineup before we keep moving?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually a pretty decent matchup, kind of middle of the road matchup, Washington against the tight end. But I mean, 5K for Darren Waller with all the coach speak and everything. I mean, you had to assume like he was just going to get locked in on. I mean, they need the guy. They've been struggling on offense, and you went out and spent a lot of equity to pick this guy up. So definitely can see how that works. And I mean, you can argue he was their number one. He's their number one weapon on offense at 5K. So that's the whole thing. Kind of same thing with Kelsey, right? Kelsey, $1,500, $2,000 cheaper than Alpha, like Tyreek Hills, right? Cooper Kupps. And Waller's the same kind of thing at 5K flat.
Yeah, and I didn't get enough of Foreman. You can look at it from the flop leg perspective, Roshan being out, all of that. I like the guys that were a little bit more money, but just to note it, like, again, same thing. Anytime you have a situation like this is part of the review and analysis process, is going back and looking at this stuff. Think about it. Like, if Jacobs is going to be that high owned, if the game script just flips, which it always can, you have a guy at a limited price that we all liked last week that still has a situation where there's no Roshan. Like, this is still a good spot if the game script flips. And the Raiders are with a backup quarterback on the road coming into Chicago at Soldier Field. So I just think in general, if you missed this or didn't quite get enough, like myself, I think that's a spot where you just have to think back and look at it and realize that's an error, right? Like, just go back and think about it. There was multiple reasons, not outside of the results, to say that, I think I could have done better picking this spot and using it in some of these main lineups to help build up. And you'll see some of the sharper lineups later on that obviously include them. Not you need them now because of the score, but just saying the build makes perfect sense because of it. Before we get to that, Nades, let's review the stack rankings. We can't look at them when they absolutely crush and then not look at them when they put up a C score. But I mean, maybe it's a B plus, maybe B minus. It wasn't the greatest week for the stack rankings, but we want to be transparent. We want to show that stuff off. I mean, the great stuff was Lamar, Andrews, way up the board. You'll see this is yesterday, right before lock, our last update for the stack rankings. Mahomes, Kelsey, Rice. If you were going expensive, they were up there. One takeaway I have, Nades, from multiple weeks of doing this, again, I'm still giving these a low score because it hasn't been as good. We did have guys like Dobbs, I believe, scored. JSN had a great game, and obviously the DK Metcalf news. Andrews crushed. Sutton scored. These guys both scored. Mahomes had him and Kelsey career games. Nakua. Like, there's good stuff here. But one takeaway is the last 2 weeks, this week and last, if you see these value guys, and I think one thing I'm going to start doing, obviously Watson the injury, but he wasn't playing good before that. But what I'm going to start doing, Nades, is looking at these guys as the value, use the value plays more than necessarily stacking it up just with their quarterbacks to make everything work. Because the last 2 weeks we've noticed it. If you go to like what we would call quote unquote the real quarterbacks or the top dog quarterbacks, they've done pretty well. And that's something I will say before I kick it to you. I definitely did not like the expensive quarterbacks. The one I did like, though, was Lamar. It was in my slate plan. I said, when I'm going expensive, the guy I like most is Lamar. And I kept saying that multiple times. Him to Andrews with Gibbs ended up in some main spots. We talked about that a lot in the Discord. I liked lineups like that, but I was not as high on Lamar as the other guys that I was on. And I mostly went with the cheaper guys, and it did not pan out. So your thoughts on the stack rankings and then that conversation around expensive quarterbacks or the quote-unquote really good quarterbacks that you can just play up top there.
Yeah, no, I kind of echo the same thoughts. It's happened to me. Obviously, it's not just our stack rankings. You look at anyone across the industry, everyone was, I mean, the Packers stack, right, against the Broncos, that game, everybody was on that game between Russell. I mean, people were playing Russell, people were playing Jordan Love. It was just the nature of slate yesterday. People wanted to pay down at quarterbacks, myself included. But like you, I saw Lamar Jackson, Flowers, and Andrews. That was actually my best team on the day. Scored 165, something like that. Obviously had some pieces not get there in the afternoon. Zay Flowers kind of just put up a mid performance when Andrews is obviously doing what Andrews did there. And you got Justice Hill was in there for a while and things like that. So definitely, I'm going to look at that more, right? Because every week so far, right, these value guys on these stack rankings, these 1 and 2, the wide receiver or a tight end, they all continue to crush. And when you plug those value guys in, it allows you to spend up more at a serviceable quarterback, especially in a script like or a slate like yesterday, right, where everyone's paying down. That's also where you can pay up to be contrarian, right, as well. You talk about that all the time. Lamar Jackson was super low owned yesterday. Mahomes, I'm never really a Mahomes guy, but if you would have grabbed some of these value guys, right, the JSN, the Mark Andrews price was pretty cheap. What, 5,500? I think he was, or 5,700. And you allowed to spend more up at quarterback. So that's definitely a good takeaway. But yeah, I mean, overall, we can't just hide these when things don't go our way. So being transparent is definitely a huge thing over here as well at SHIPIT Nation.
Yeah, and some of the one-offs too, like if Mike Evans ended up in there or if Nakua, like those are huge one-offs that had big days yesterday.
I think both Pickens and Johnson.
What's that?
I think both Pickens and Johnson had decent games as well. Like not like crazy games.
But I know Pickett ran a touchdown in himself. They ended up putting up 20. They had 24 points and got the job done. And Najee Harris got in the box there too. But yeah, Pickens 5 for 107. Deontay Johnson 5 for 79. So again, not the worst days, but just to note, that was definitely something to look at. But definitely, if you're going up, I like the Lamar stack for sure. Crazy how Gibbs got there, but Gibbs got there. So if you do, like I was saying all day, like if you're putting Gibbs in, you want him to score and speed the game up. And it just ended up being Ravens onslaught, just crushing early and often. And then, Gibbs got there at the end. Funny how that stuff goes. Last week it was with Carolina. Didn't expect those guys to thought Thielen and Hubbard would have to play catch up last week. They ended up going up 14-0 and still losing the game, but those guys getting their points that way. This one, the opposite. Thought Detroit would be in this game. They were not even close. Shout out to my guy Hoop. Little knock on him right there. We have my Ravens versus his Lions. We had that conversation on the Sunday show. The Ravens showed up. I would take Lamar Jackson over Goff, especially after a performance like that yesterday. But we'll save that story for this afternoon when we do the Monday Night Football show. Do want to remind you guys quickly here that coming up tomorrow, obviously, NBA is back. Those that are just joining us for the first time, now's the quick marketing segment. We'll break it down. Just to let you guys know, if you want to get in on the action at ShipItNation.com, you can use code NBA10. Expires tomorrow. This gets you everything. It's NFL, MLB, NBA, PGA, MMA, NHL, MLB obviously in the playoffs, but now you're going into a heavy season of all these other sports just starting. NHL, NBA, NFL only mid-season, a little bit less actually. And then you've got PGA coming back for 3 weeks starting next week. MMA has been hot. Hoop had another big weekend, members winning in MMA as well. This gets you 10% off any membership. I'll click it back over here for a second because Nades and I are going to show some other stuff off. But all you have to do, go to the site, ShipItNation.com. You can see all our free shows, everything. We have projections, ownership, all that. But if you just click Join the Nation, you'll see it all right here. Pops up pretty quickly. If you're looking on a phone, that's why it shows some of the same stuff because it goes vertically. But just to break it down, monthly, 6-month, or annual. It's actually less than this because obviously using code NBA10, this will be $62. This will work down to less than $59. This will work down to less than $49. But it's any plan. It's not for 1 month only or for one time only. It locks in completely, and you get everything we offer for the low price. So you get all the sports, projections, ownership, the tools, the rankings, the core reports, the player pools, the slate plans, the education courses, the Discord community. Education right now, if you guys are wanting to look at NBA, we just added the new course, Hoop, Title, and myself. We break it all down for you. There's the table of contents. If you look here, go through the importance of tools, projections, ownership. We talk about review and analyzing your process. We talk about all the stuff with your goals, mindset, bankroll management. We talk about how to handle late news, injuries, tools, projections specifically for NBA, optimizer and how to use it, why correlation isn't as important. Talk about game theory leverage, late swap, huge in NBA, and then break down the differences from DK and FanDuel. If you're still in NFL streets and you're watching this for a reason, we have all this and more. It's a 4-hour course for NFL. We break it down completely, talk about live finals. We do a whole segment on Showdown if you're wanting to get into the Showdown streets. So again, very simply, take it up, go to shipitnation.com, 24 hours to use this code until it runs out. We'll pump it again this afternoon, but pick the plan for you. Go to join now where it says have a coupon. You do. It's NBA 10. It rounds out tonight, $62.10 a month. That's locked in. It will renew at that. You don't have to change anything. You get right into the Discord immediately and get in there and have access to everything that we offer on the site. If you do want, I will note, an optimizer, that will be additional. When you go to join the nation, you'll see here, get the solver, optional purchase. If you do want that, you just add it on. It gets everything auto-synced, but even then, it still comes in much less than $100 a month, where most places are charging $120 up to $170 for basically just similar items, not even all with projections, ownership, everything. And then you also have to add the optimizer package. So keep that in mind. Nades, let's review this Mega Millionaire Maker. And we're looking at this tool to break it down. I know for a fact, and you can see the scores here when you look at the leaderboard, that Ricky D, incredible player, one of the best in the world, especially when it comes to NFL, and B Zurif, they did tie. Labs is showing Ricky D take all the money. I know he's not as happy because he's probably 400K light when it comes to this. He should have got 600K here, but we'll look at this. They did have different lineups. So I'll start with Ricky D's lineup. He had Mahomes, Rashee Rice, and Kelsey. We saw those guys in the stack rankings. We saw JSN in the stack rankings, Marquise Brown and Kenneth Walker. So we got 3 pieces of that game. Jerome Ford, Deontay Foreman, and the Chicago D. Used all of his salary, used some chalk, but was also extremely different in certain spots. Mahomes only coming in at 10% for a guy as good as his caliber. Rashee Rice, 8%. Chicago D, 4%. And Foreman, only 13%. Again, this is the mega 44-44. Thoughts on this lineup, and then we'll get to some other lineups as well.
Yeah, overall, I think it's a nice build. The package combo, you talk about that a lot, right? Kenneth Walker is going to get ownership. He adjusted, right? JSN picked up more ownership, but not enough people pivoted to him with that DK news, right? I was planning all day, much like yourself. I know you were, that I didn't think DK was going to play at all. So I was already high on JSN as well myself, in my MME sets, in my personal builds. So just packaging those two together, obviously they both had ownership there, but in lower stakes stuff, like in my stuff, JSN was like 17%, right? So it just shows contest stakes and the sharper the players as well. So obviously a lot of people there, but just play those two together. You're running that stack rankings there, right? Mahomes, Rashee Rice, Travis Kelsey, that 3-man stack. Rashee Rice has been the emerging wide receiver one over the last couple of weeks. We've seen it. We've had Chiefs on a lot of showdowns. Rice has been the guy in terms of wide receivers behind Kelsey. So he's just going in on that. It was interesting that he didn't run it back with a guy like Josh Palmer instead of Marquise Brown, right? Because he knew Marquise Brown was going to get a lot of ownership. So bringing the run back, I probably would have had, instead of a one-off Hollywood Brown there, that I knew was going to be chalky at the price point in that game. That was a high total game there that people wanted to go to. I probably would have ran it back with Palmer, but that's correlated with the Kenneth Walker and JSN play. So it's just a matter of what you wanted to do in terms of your correlation. The Jerome Ford kind of was probably just the last piece, right? It fit. The Foreman Bears defense correlation, I like that play a lot. I was a week early myself on that, but overall it's a very nicely constructed lineup overall, and definitely makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, for those that watch, like I just look for these things. It's first look, doing a review. I bring up some stuff. I didn't spend a bunch of time on this, but I just see it quickly here to look at this. Like the lineup is correlated perfectly. It makes perfect sense. No bring back. You don't need bring backs. I know Ricky D's been, on X, Twitter, whatever, and talking about, I've seen him even mention stuff on that in the past, where he's been on the LOL show or something like that and saying it. Like obviously the game evolves. I remember last year he was talking a lot about the double tight end thing, which we'll get to in a second, in the $20. But last year with pricing, tight ends got cheaper. A lot of people didn't adapt. And in the higher dollar, smaller field especially, you could use like a $3,500 tight end with another receiving tight end like a Kelsey or an Andrews, or to treat it like that. and still get yourself some pretty nice lineups, or even use 2 cheap tight ends on certain weeks where you had guys that were capable of getting 2 touchdowns, and that would just boost every other position in your lineup. People weren't really adapting to that price. But just a quick note that I see, I'm pretty sure on this math, but if you take Mahomes to Geno at 6,000 and use that 2,300, it gets you to $7,400 Josh Jacobs. So just a prime example where Geno with JSN and Walker with the run back of Marquise Brown would make sense. Jacobs, who would have made sense, had a similar ownership, I think, to Ford this tournament, and people were higher on Ford. But just to note it, I think that still makes sense. But then you would just have had Rice and Kelsey. The thing is, that's just a fine build too. But if you look at what more people were doing, way more people would have had Geno in a build like this. And I believe, I'll look in a second. Let me just see exposures here. Change it by position. The field. Jacobs was 24. It was pretty close on the ownership there. I wonder if he played any Geno. Field was 20% on Geno versus 10% on Mahomes. And you got to know that Mahomes has a bigger floor ceiling combination. And if you wanted to get off, the other thing was too, the obvious factor, just going back, is he went with Foreman. He was already sort of leveraging that on the other side. So it wouldn't end up that way. It's just to know, like, you could have swapped a couple things around. There was definitely other defenses down in this range that you could have made moves with. So I don't hate that. Like, I think that's another thing you could look at, just ways to move it around. Let's see his other lineup that was up here. So just to note, Nades, that's what I was going to bring up. You mentioned it just now. Look at his other lineup that came in fourth.
It had the Palmer, yeah.
It had the Palmer run back. So it had Mahomes, it had Rice, it had Walker, Kelsey, it had Bourne, Rashad White, the Baltimore D at 2,500. So again, 48, 49, 50, 51, right? So 300 here and 100 left over. No Jacobs. So it could have been, again, he could have kept it the same with, I guess then it would have been Bourne and Palmer. So it would lead me to believe, like, I think he's running 3 uniques, because that would have been 2, right? If he goes and plugs in, you get the same thing here. He could have swapped Rashad White to Foreman and Baltimore D to Chicago, and then it would have been a 2v2 of just Palmer and Bourne. So if he's running 3 uniques and something like this, that would be why you don't see that. So just another takeaway and a note, but I think that would have been similar. That would have led to the win, right? If he had it just flipped around. If some of this in the other build, because he only lost with this one by 6 points, and he would have got 33 over 16 here, and he actually would have got a little more, 3 more points on the D as well. Now that's results oriented. Again, the reason we do these shows, the reason we look back, as we're looking for angles, seeing what other really good players are doing. Now, even if Ricky D didn't chop first, I know it shows it, but I saw it. It was 600K. I still would have looked at him here. Scout, another very sharp player. We can look at his lineup. He had the highest Lamar. So Lamar, Zay, Andrews, run back with Gibbs and Amon-Ra, KCD. I like this lineup quite a bit. I'll talk about it in a second. Deontay Foreman, fine. Bourne, and then Deontay Johnson. Anything on this one that you like, Nades? Obviously, you liked the Lamar side yesterday too, so pretty similar kind of to some of the. I know you ran Lamar, Zay, Andrews, Gibbs at least, and this lineup put up 198. So talk to me about this one.
Yeah, I think it's a great build. I mean, you're grabbing the whole offense there in Gibbs and Amon-Ra with no Montgomery there, and everything going on. And you're already going in on the double stack with Lamar, right? Obviously, Lamar can do it on his legs as well. So if you're double stacking and Lamar's getting there as a double stack and bringing 2 pass catchers with, you have to assume it's a back and forth game. Obviously, it's a unique situation, right? They got dusted, and Amon-Ra and Gibbs both got there. Obviously, Gibbs got there late, but Amon-Ra just shows you Amon-Ra doesn't need to score to get there. He's the PPR guy. Everyone knows that in Detroit. He had the 8K price point, which was cheaper than the Cooper Kupps, right there in the same range as Nakua, other guys that people are playing. So that makes sense there. It's already tied to the game. So you say this all the time, right? When you're going to create it's easier to hit a 2-3 leg parlay than it is to hit a 6 or 7 team parlay. And if you're already going in, why not grab a de facto number 1 there and say, hey, it's a competitive game going back and forth. So I love that. The Foreman, obviously just very high on a lot of that sharper players were very high in Foreman at that price point. I mean, they were only a 2-point underdog, and they're at home, and he's on the other side of the chalk, everything like that. And it is still the Raiders, right? It's still the Raiders, and it's still a 38.5 total with a home running back that's sub 5K. So everything makes sense there. Overall, it's a great build. I like the Kansas City defense a lot. They've been a very, very good defense all year long. And they were $2,400 with spots where everyone wanted to pay up. I mean, pay up at receiver, pay up at, there was the spend up quarterback options, the spend up running back options. So I was very high on Kansas City defense.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention on the top of the show, Nades, I think you need to jet out, right? It's the half hour mark. I'm going to round this thing out solo. So appreciate you. As always, man, we'll be back next week. The combo of us and Tyler from Line Star. Next week, we'll be back at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. But I'll hit you up later, man. Appreciate you.
Okay. Sounds good. Appreciate it, y'all.
All right, man. Later. All right, so we'll go back to it here. I wanted to talk about this one quickly because there's another thing, too, that I saw that I liked is, first off, we did talk a little bit about this on yesterday's show where on a slate of just 10 games, on a slate where there was a lot of low totals, more on that in 1 second, and situational stuff, is if you could just find the game to go off. And I loved our guy Hoop, who had said the thought that he had, I love what he said, was around in this game, people were talking about wind and weather and all this, and ownership wasn't super low, but it wasn't super high either. It was sort of just mediocre and in the middle. And he had said that wind would never affect a game like those two teams because Lamar, Zay Flowers, these design plays for Zay Flowers, these short intermediate passes to a guy like Mark Andrews, that's just not going to hurt them. Amon-Ra, short routes. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to either do it on the ground or on these short catch and runs. So it all made perfect sense. And in a field size of 768, if this game ends up being the one, and it almost did, Detroit did not show up, but I'll talk more on that in a second. But just to say, you didn't have to worry about too much else. Second part that I keep saying I'll talk more about is the part here where, again, look at this, 26 and 27.6, 6 points. People just got to remember this, man. Like, I know their price is 8K and 6,300, but just it's any game, it's any spot, it's anything. People just always go, if there's only going to be a 38-point total, I can't play these guys because it's going to suck. 6 points they put up, 6 real-life points. You need fantasy points, not real points, to be able to get to the top of these tournaments. You need the most fantasy points to win on DraftKings, not the most points scored in a game. So keep that in mind. These pieces can still definitely come through in these spots. I'm not saying it did here, just saying in general, when people focus too much on that, that's another thing to take away. The last thing I've got for this one, I want to do one more, and then I'll hop over to the $20, is that when you overstack like this and run 5 guys from the same spot, Foreman, Bourne, Deontay, Kansas City, you don't really need to do all this extra correlation. You can just stick with what you've got here, because if that game goes off, you kind of just want to plug in the best pieces or the pieces that you like that fit and make it all work, while being cognizant of some things. But I do think, like, interesting, if you're not going to play the high total 48-point game, I never have a problem just playing the defense from it, because if it doesn't get there and you're saying by running this stack, you think this stack's better for fantasy scoring, then this could be a reason that the fantasy scoring doesn't go well, as the defense shows up and does well there. Another thing earlier was with the Cleveland D. I didn't go to it here. I'm going to click over, if it doesn't freeze, and go to the exposures. Should take me there. Just let me see here. Let's go by defense, and let's go by points. Cleveland D. Another one. They weren't the best, but just to show them at 3,300. Again, people think, I'm looking for defenses and shutouts. No, you're looking for defenses that score. That was a high-scoring game yesterday. Insane. It broke the total by like almost 10 after the first half. I think it was like 6 or 8 points higher than the game total at half. So just keep that in mind as well. Again, that you need defenses that can score, not set up, not just not looking for a shutout. That's an added bonus. You need opportunities, quarterbacks, running backs, people that can make, guys that can make mistakes, and then you need a defense that finds that. These guys, my friend Mayo, he was saying it yesterday, he posted it out. He said, like, they look like the 85 Bears half the time, or 90% of the time, and then the other 10% time, they were looking like Denver the week they played Miami, and Miami dropped 70. So that happens, but that 90% is worth so much more than that 10. You know what I mean? Like, you just want that, because that's where you're getting your opportunities and the ability to put up points. As usual, though, you see why defense typically not a big thing to worry about. It's just completely spread out across the board. You can kind of land wherever you wanted there. Let's flip over. Let's move to this $20 Death Star Canteen. I said earlier he might have taken some notes from last week. 247.6 was what the total optimal put up. He was very close. He didn't quite do as good of our guy D-Dry. on getting as close to the optimal, but he won the exact same amount of money and completely one-upped him on first place, first, second. Last week, our guy D-Dry got the job done by 11 points. He got the job done by just under 18 here. So keep that aside. That's kind of interesting. But this lineup is also interesting. We've got it here. So Mahomes, Kelsey, fine. Andrews, double tight end. We talked about National Tight Ends Day. Cleveland D against Josh Downs. Random one-off, Sutton. Jahmyr Gibbs does go with Mark Andrews. He did plug in JSN, who I thought was a fine play before the news and after the news. Didn't really care about that. I was good with him either way, but not a ton going on here. So he had a team stack, Mahomes to Kelsey. The game stack, they classify it as because of the other, mix and match of, I think, Gibbs and Andrews. He had the quarterback pass catcher. It all ties into one here. No bring back. Don't care about this one anyway. Standard stuff. Need low-owned guys for sure. Josh Downs, a complete separator here at 26.5 in this spot. And then no players against D. Really odd one. You almost never see this. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Sean brings up a good point. Kelsey's a wide receiver now. Yeah. I mean, this is the guys like him and Kelsey. This is where a two tight end lineup really makes sense because it's just two guys that are basically wide receiver ones for their team. So that you can look at from any different perspective, but definitely in general always stands out to me. So I think that is one thing to look at. Do you guys have other thoughts, comments, things like that you want to bring up on it? I do want to go back and see now. This is what I want to look at. Two things. One, 9 rosters. So Death Star Canteen had 9 lineups. 5 of them were unique. User exposures. Let's see here. Let's go by position. So you have Mahomes, Geno, Russell Wilson, and Brian Hoyer. Walker, Robinson, Najee Harris, Josh Jacobs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Deontay Foreman. You can see some of the other guys that he had there at running back. Marquise Brown, McLaurin. So Josh Downs, he did have a huge stand on. Huge leverage on Josh Downs. You can flip it to look like this as well. But Brown, McLaurin, Tony, obviously he was playing Mahomes. And this is on 9 lineups. So also you guys know I always discount this and don't take it too seriously because 9 lineups, I mean, this is the percentages. This is the exposure, but it's not the same as somebody who's in there for 150 where their stand is on the 150 lineups. A stand is a stand, though, so I am still curious just to see it. You know what I mean? Obviously, you get a lot of Kelsey when you're running not only 2 tight end lineups, but playing Mahomes in the majority and then really spread it out of defense. So pretty standard stuff there. Going back to the leaderboard, I want to see here actually just – I don't know why it keeps doing this. This tool has been in and out for me the last little bit, but let me swap it over to the $20. To see here, Dalladino. I thought they would be the first one, but just to see it here, Dalladino, a regular, very good player, 150 lines. So again, you see same thing we've often seen: 1 lineup, 2 lineups, 13 lineups, the 20 max thrown in. Don't hate this approach, and obviously a pretty good day. Probably had it in the 20 max, $3 or $1 or something like that as well. But Dalladino, I just want to look there for a second because they play a lot. I want to see what their setup was like here, and then we'll look at their lineup before we move on to mine as we round the show out a little bit earlier, probably this week. So just to quickly get to it here, but Geno, Hoyer, you can see here, Lamar, Baker Mayfield, Mahomes, and majority quarterbacks were 5% and above, used seven quarterbacks. After that, some sprinkles you can see down the board. I don't know, some people do that. That's just the way, if you have the rest of your core hit, you may have, get a stack or 2 around it. I don't hate it, but that's why you see some people do that. Others just tighten up completely. Huge stand on Kenneth Walker. This is where, like I say, it is a stand, even though you're only playing 9 lineups, you're getting that is your stand and your leverage. This is a big time stand, right? You're putting almost 75% of your lineups on Kenneth Walker, and I think for good reason. Obviously, a pretty good play. Didn't completely crush, but involved and had the opportunity to do even more. Big stand on Jahmyr Gibbs. Big stand on Rachaad White. After that, under the field but close on Josh Jacobs. Foreman just over the field. Pacheco way under on Jerome Ford. Any other big stands? Let's just sort it by leverage to see. No, that was pretty much about it. Jalen Warren a little bit, but nothing too serious with the overall. Let's look at wide receiver. Took stands on JSN, Lockett, Zay Flowers, Devontae, Bourne. Some of these other guys here that you can see. Tight end. Most exposure was to Andrews, Kelsey, Musgrave, and Laporta. About the field, though, nothing serious or substantial. Besides Laporta was about 10% over the field, and Njoku a little bit over, nothing crazy there. And then I would imagine, yes, fairly spaced out at defense. Most, you see a lot of regulars that are just capping the D 20 to 25%. So that makes sense. And then Ross brought up a good point there. Gets them away from Walker. Doing that got him away from Walker and Jacobs chalk as well. So yeah, Jacobs chalk, hard to get in there too when you're going to Walker at 75% because you're typically using that money on that same spot that most people would have Jacobs in when they're not on Walker. So let's go back and look at his lineup that did the best. This was the best lineup out of all of that. And it's the completion. Had every single lineup trend on this tool. So Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, another overstack. So Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra, Deontay Foreman, Chicago defense, Josh Downs, and JSN. And like Josh Downs, you just kind of land there. I think that's fine. But the rest makes perfect sense. Left money. I mean, this could have been 600 is 51. It could have been a way to get, you could have thrown Josh Palmer in here and not got the same score. But I will say this, and I use this all the time. If you guys are looking at these builds, I know it's in a Millie Maker and it's off 150 set. It's just the best one. But I think it's very possible that you could have got to this yesterday in something single entry, in something with a smaller field, in something like the satellites where you're playing to win mega tickets or 555 tickets or things like that, where you say, I'm going to overstack that game with those guys. You saw it when you go back over here into our stack rankings. I mean, there's those three guys are right there. JSN is right there. Who's some of the other guys he's got in it? Foreman, Chicago defense, Josh Downs. I guess one of the other things you can look at too, we talked about this last week, but with our stack rankings is another way to use them. Look at this. I know, shout out to our guy Hamwich, who was trying to make this a thing yesterday. Bajan actually didn't, whoever gave him the nickname Teabag, by the way, is pretty solid, but Teabag did not have a horrible day for what it could have been. But I'm just saying, like, to note down here, when you see Bajan down here, this may be another reason to say if it's not going to be the passing game, then why not go with Foreman? And again, not the result side of it where he gets 33 points and the defense, but just to say, okay, if Hoyer is down here, Bajan is down here, I can just go with Foreman and the Chicago D. Now that leaves you, JSM was just to me, a plug and play, 3,900. We talked about, I had him in my core. I know a lot of people were talking about him in the Discord. We liked him before the DK news, but it was trending that DK was going to be out anyway, at least to our thoughts. And so that was fine to get a guy like him in there. But then the rest just builds itself. That's 5, 6, 7, 8. And you land here with $5,100. So, I mean, if you go back to the exposures again, and this just keeps doing it to me, but I'm going to keep being a sucker for it. And you go to really, actually, just to go back here, I think, where's it at here? JSN. I'm on the wrong tournament now. I apologize, but I just had an idea. $5,100 and JSN in the flex is just as simple, I think, as plugging in Ford, right? Go back here. Yeah, and not, again, Ford would not have put up these numbers to what Downs did. That's not what I'm trying to get to, but I'm saying, what did Ford put up yesterday, like 15 or 16? You're talking about a 208. 208 would have crushed in a lot of King of the Beach qualifiers, mega qualifiers, satellites, things like that, or in your single entries, all of that stuff. Actually, it's a good segue. Let's go over. Shout out to Dalladino. Great player. Had a good run. We'll be up there plenty, I'm sure, and see a bunch more. But just to look here at like the $50 single entry, you're talking 7 to 10 grand with that same lineup. And I can't remember exactly what the exposure was. Let's see if anybody had Ford here, because this is it was just here. Sorry. 17.4. So it was actually 11. So it would have been around 209. So you're talking 10 to 20 grand in something like the $50 single entry. And again, you could say results oriented, but that build was 5 guys that would have made the most sense, like Lamar, Zay, and Andrews with ASRB and with Gibbs. That makes perfect sense. And then you go pull off the Foreman with the defense play. You're not playing Josh Jacobs. You see Bajan down the board. You say, I'm going to use the running game there and leverage the Jacobs side. JSN is a plug and play. You land on Ford or White. I think most people were going with Ford by ownership. I don't know how, by the way, this got to this ownership when Hunt was pronounced in before the game, and people still thought this was a phenomenal play. Realistically, this came there off of a 69-yard touchdown run was where the majority of this came from. So I was kind of against Jerome Ford yesterday a little bit, but just to note it, I thought this was kind of interesting to see. But again, to get to 209, not that crazy of a build when you go back and break it all down. Using this combo, it had the lineup that we saw, still JSN. Like a lot of these lineups, like this lineup right here, had a lot of the same pieces. Gibbs, JSN, Foreman, Ford. It's when you go plug in that other stack around it with the Detroit game with Baltimore, you end up landing there. So I think that's good. TJ, I saw he had a big week. I didn't go back and look. Let's see. Maybe it was the Wildcat. No, Papa Gates won the Wildcat. Shout out to Shrek. Great dude. He won the game changer. Not doing every review today, so I don't want to see it. I was just trying to see because I saw my guy Anil, really good dude. So good for him. Huge day there. But again, 208. These are more expensive buy-ins, but just to show these scores would have done well. I saw TJ have a pretty big day. So just to look at it was Mahomes, Rice, Kelsey, Palmer using a wide receiver in the flex, JSN, Marquise Brown, Kenneth Walker. You land on 3 to 3,200. What was the other defenses there? Like, what was the 30? Wasn't there a $3,200 defense yesterday? I know what this is going to do on me. No, it didn't this time. Great. Let's go here and sort by price. 8 points for the Seattle D, but he had Arizona in there. So I guess this would have made the most sense anyway. But again, yeah, just to see it again, these lineups, when you go back and look after, it's always easier. Of course, you have the puzzle with the cover, but just to say it, Mahomes, Rice, Kelsey, Palmer, get action on Walker, JSN, and Brown. You land on Foreman, and you land on the Giants D. You could have done anything. Could have had Chicago D in here, something like that too. So just to say it, that's really how you can do it. 202 wouldn't have won the milli in the $20, but these lineups do very well. JSF 900 has been all over the place lately, just absolutely crushing as well. Let's see theirs, but Mahomes, Kelsey in the flex, double tight end, Walker with McBride and JSN, the run back with Palmer, Evans, Foreman, Washington. Unique lineup, so just different. Again, just other things that you can look at. And then I'm going to go quickly to the $50. This was one of the single entries I ran yesterday, so I'll show you guys just so you can see it. It hit on everything. Did not force that, but just typically how I'm going to build my lineups anyway. But this was the core that I had up. I like Geno, Walker, and JSN. I wanted to use them together. I know some places and sites were saying that you don't want to do that. Again, on the sample size of three big games that Walker's had, I did not care about that. And I knew this would be the case where if I play him at 60%, a way to chop into it was to use it in a three-man stack. So that's how I was looking at it. Marquise Brown, loved him on the other side. Jacobs, I landed on the Vegas D at the end. I wasn't super high on them, but just in this lineup, it went with these three, the run back, Kelsey and Palmer as a secondary. I had Kelsey in there. Robinson as a one-off there to use two cheap options where most weren't doing that. And then I just happened to land on Jacobs and Las Vegas defense as a 2v2 that I could look at to use salary and get to a unique lineup. Not any super low owned guys, but I'm okay when it's all like 10%, 16, 15, 15, 15. These are just hard to control and know exactly how they'll truly end up. And then this got a boost late in the day with late swap being a bigger factor on yesterday's slate. So I'll leave it there, guys. That's going to do it for this week. We'll come back next week with the three-man booth. We'll get through more for you guys. Hopefully this was helpful. If you guys do want to go sign up, you can go to shipitnation.com. Again, 24 hours to use this. You can use it on the monthly, the 6-month, or the annual to lock in the best price that you can get. And then it does not go away. It's not one term only, nothing like that. It will stay locked in. That's going to do it for this one, guys. For myself, ToeTagginTambo, let's ship it.